Coherence Podcast invites you to get up close and personal with creatives who have figured out how to make a living doing the thing that they love most, and to build custom careers that truly fit their sensibilities. Traditional linear careers are a thing of the past, and it's time that we accept that work today is fluid. It's full of ambiguity, there are more options, and therefore more potential for overwhelm. I'm here to guide you through the wild world of working for yourself so you can cut out the noise, center your own judgment, and live a life that makes amazing sense for you. I'm Melissa Wong, your host of Coherence Podcast. I started my career zigzagging from job to job, afraid that I would never find my thing. I was a late career bloomer with a list of jobs that felt too scattered or not impressive enough. Fast forward to today, after finding a true vocation as a coach for creative independence, and I get to show up every day to a business that I love. I believe everyone can create a job that suits them, whether that's building your own business or weaving together a patchwork of different jobs. It doesn't have to be a traditional 9-to-5. It just has to make you feel aligned and alive and generate a livelihood that lets you live life according to your own values and sensibilities. If you want to learn what makes sense for you, listen in and make sense with us. When I first met Smiley, he was dashing about this house that I was living in, and he was in the midst of helping host a big dinner for his community. I think it was a Passover dinner. And yeah, he was just kind of like carrying a big tray of something, and there was a lot of commotion. And I knew immediately why he was nicknamed Smiley when I met him, because he has this, very infectious, large smile that just makes you feel his warmth and his friendliness. And I think that first meeting photograph in my mind has extended to how I think of him today, which is someone who is really good at being in relationship with other people and puts in a good amount of effort to bring people together, to show up for friends. And he's really threaded that theme throughout a lot of the things he's done for his career. Recently, he wrote a book on friendship and the loneliness epidemic, and he writes and speaks about workplace belonging. So really thinking about how people feel connected and a part of a workplace. He is someone who I think has done such a great job of building a career that works for his gifts, his energetic gifts of being with people, of really motivating people to want to come together, of having this sort of disarming warmth that makes people lean in and feel comfortable, and to figure out the financial side of things so that he can be orchestrating his revenue streams in a way that supports the life he wants to live and his lifestyle. So I'm so excited to share this interview with you. Let's go. Thank you for being here with me. And I thought of you immediately when I was thinking about rebooting the podcast, because last time we hung out, you told me that you were finding a groove in your business and it was going really well. And that was exciting to hear. But I think the thing that really stood out in my mind was that you felt like it was a payoff from doing, like, showing up and being consistent and really like tending to your business for, has it been over 5 years now?
Much longer.
Yeah. Okay. And I think like consistency is something that's elusive for a lot of people, and especially creatives. And so I was just really impressed to hear that, of just showing up again and again. And I'm so excited to just download, what your journey has been, some insights from that. And so I think I wanted to start off big and broad, which is when people ask you the classic, sometimes loathed question of what do you do? How do you find yourself responding?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what I say now may be different than what I said in the past, but I say now that I'm a professional keynote speaker. Sometimes I say motivational speaker, but I feel like that creates an eye roll for people. But yeah, I'm a professional keynote speaker. I speak at companies and conferences about workplace culture, workplace belonging, workplace connection. I've been speaking for over 10 years, and I've been running my own business since about 2013, speaking since probably about 2015 or 16. So it's been a while. It's been a long journey. In the speaking, I do many other things. I write books. I do some facilitation. I build community. Um, but I do thought leadership. But really, the
Mhm.
way I make a living, my business is speaking. And I think it took me a little while to kind of get there. Like when I, first started out, I didn't even know speaking was a thing. I kind of thought of it as, maybe I had seen like Tony Robbins or something like that, or you see TED Talks, but I didn't actually know that non-famous people, got brought into companies, organizations, conferences to speak and got paid to do that. I didn't know that was a thing. I started out as a writer. I started out kind of as a creative. My creative kind of start to my business was writing, and then I
Mhm.
fell into the speaking, which actually I think is kind of one of the better ways to get into a business. Is I find that a lot of people that are pretty successful in their creative careers didn't start with that thing, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like they're not like, I'm gonna be a podcaster, like I'm gonna be the next, whoever your favorite podcaster is, or I'm gonna be a start a bakery. They started out with something and then made a huge like left right turn, or even like a little turn within that to get to the thing. So that was kind of my journey, which I'm happy to share, of like how I fell into speaking. But that's
Yeah,
how I
that's
answer that question, is that I'm a keynote speaker. And you know I used to not know what to say to that, because I'm like, I'm a creative, or I do lots of things. But I'm Smiley. I make people feel, happier. I make people feel, that they can tackle things in their life. But now it's like, no, I'm a keynote speaker. That's just what I say.
yes. Thank you for sharing kind of the behind the scenes or the evolution of how to answer that question. I think it's literally someone in one of my in Launch Lab, my business incubator, was asking about like, is a title important? Do I need to have one? And I think most people I saw responding and chiming in to say like, yes, it is important for just navigating the world and having other people comprehend what you do. And I think when we have multiple things that we can do, it is a challenge at times, especially for multi-talented, multifaceted people to only say one thing, right? And to kind of edit out all those other things and just trust that those identities still live within you, even if your response to that simple question is tailored to, a more singular answer. So a lot goes into answering that question. And I think you already started to segue into it, but I would love to look back at your career, you know, coherence, the idea of the coherent studio, why I named it that for me is kind of realizing that storytelling is such an essential part of helping people understand who they are and know what they want and what to aspire to next in their life or in their career. And it's so hard to sometimes look forward and find that coherence. That's what I try to help people do. It's a lot easier when we look back. And I'm curious, when you look back at your career story, what are some of the key moments that you feel like brought you to today?
Yeah, I'll start with kind of like my career transition moment. Like I feel like every great business has this kind of like birth moment, or at least, and I wouldn't even say this is like my business birth moment as much as kind of like my self evolution moment. But in 2012, I had been living in Washington, D.C. I was working for the United States government. And I had a job that, like, definitely by all measures of resume impressiveness or sounded very was very good, right? Like it hit all the boxes of like at the time I think I was about 28, 29, like where I should be. The government doesn't pay exceptionally well compared to the corporate sector, but like definitely, a good wage, job security, a lot of ability to kind of move up the career ladder. And I just was super, super unhappy and kind of in this period of really kind of like, why am I unhappy? Like, I have a job. It's like kind of coming out of the recession. This is back in like 2010, 2011. Like, I should be really grateful. My friends wish they had this job. Friends that have a lot, like a master's degree or went to grad school. I didn't go to grad school. They wish they had this job, but this kind of sense of like this is not like I'm getting to be a little bit older, this is not like what I was meant to be doing, and like what am I doing? And just feeling just like a lack of coherence or lack of alignment, while feeling kind of a little bit of shame and guilt of being like, I should just be happy for what I have, especially, like a lot of people don't have this, and feeling confused about that, which I think trips people up a lot. It's like, oh, this is what you're supposed to do, or like other people would be very impressed by this, or this is good, but being like, this is not really where I wanted to be.
Mm.
I went to this program called Starting Block, which no longer exists, but it's the Starting Block Institute for Social Innovation. And it was like basically like the first time I ever like met entrepreneurs that were just normal people, not like famous people in like Fast Company or Forbes or like people that you read about, but just like random people in their 20s and 30s that were doing cool shit, basically. We're starting businesses, cared about, purpose and not just making money, but helping their communities, and doing things that were artistic and creative and involved social impact and all of these things. And it just kind of blew my mind of like, I didn't really know that that was a thing. I kind of grew up in a little bit more of a, just, you kind of picked a career, and that's what you're supposed to do. And this was like a real eye-opening experience for me of just seeing all these people. And I had a friend there. I was sitting on the rooftop of a hotel bar and like watching the sunset. This is in LA. And my friend Evan asked me like, why would you be doing anything less than reaching your full potential in your life? Which is like a
Mm.
pretty good question, but also like, yeah, like how I had never ever been asked that. It doesn't sound that mind blowing now, but at the time it was like, yeah, why would I be doing anything less than reaching my full potential in my life? And like that was the moment I was just like, all right, I'm gonna leave. I'm quitting, and I'm gonna leave DC.
Mm.
And I didn't still leave for another 6 months, because I was scared. B, I wanted to save money.
Mhm.
Um, and I also like had very good relationships, in DC, both with friends and community, and also at work. Like it wasn't like I was in a horrible place. I didn't work for a like evil company or evil place. If you're that's like one of those jobs. It's those jobs are like easy to quit. Just like get out if you're in one of those things. But there were a lot of things about this that were great. It just wasn't me.
Mhm.
And so I did have that conversation with my boss, and I made the decision to move to San Francisco, California. I did not have a job when I moved out there. I didn't barely had a plan. I was just like, I'm going to do something more creative. I'm going to start writing. I'm just going to start a different life. And
Mm.
this is at the age of 30. And
Let
I
me
called
chime
it
in
my,
here to
please.
say, like, I just want to, what I love about your story is that you're painting a picture of how things were going well as far as what people might see from the outside. And you were
Yeah.
kind of living a version of success that maybe even a former version of you thought like, oh, this is successful. But the internal experience of that was mismatched. And in some ways, I'd argue those situations are have a uniquely challenging setup to get out of because there's a lot of like momentum kind of uh, I don't know, compelling you to stay put, to stay comfortable. And I really appreciate you also just sharing that timeline of like, okay, I had this beautiful epiphany with the sunset, but it took me six months, and I had all these
It
relationships,
took
and
me
I,
two and a
you
half years,
know,
actually, really. I mean, more than 6 months, but yeah, 6 months from the
yes,
decision of to do it. But it took me a couple years, actually, of when I was like
yes,
the internal feeling. I think this kind of like, oh, you're gonna quit the kind of go quit your job like immediately is first of all fantasy and also probably unwise career advice
Mm,
because that's how you burn bridges and burn relationships, right? Like that's actually and also financially is usually unwise. It's much more better to be strategic about a career transition, be like, how can the people that I currently work with or know support me in my next thing, right? What's that bridge look like?
yes.
All too often, people are always like 5 steps ahead, and they're kind of like, actually, like, okay, maybe I'm heading that direction, but like, how can I be in this moment right now that will help me get to where I want to go? So,
Yes. Yeah. 6 months to leave the job, but much longer to kind of like find your next like goal and being in stride with what you were creating next. And I think that timeline is just, I want to underline it for people listening because, there's a lot of pressure to kind of figure things out right away. And, for better or for worse, I think I've just observed that it takes time. Like when we're shedding an identity, we are learning about ourselves in a totally different way. And it doesn't happen overnight. So I think you're also painting a great picture of the nuance or sometimes the duality of you can be bold and brave and take a leap and move to another place and not know what's next. That all sounds like, wild, I think, to a lot of people. And you were thoughtful. You were thinking about what your financial runway was. You were thinking about how
yep.
to, maintain relationships in a way that they could support you in the future. And so it was like, as best as you can to take the leap, there's like a calculated um, risk, or it's like setting yourself up with like that parachute. So, yeah, you did it. It sounds like you did a great job.
It's good. I'm glad at the time, I think I was pretty scared. But
Yeah.
yes, I definitely was a little bit thoughtful about it.
Mm,
And I think for me, like one thing that I always tell people with these transitions, it's like so helpful to document it. And it doesn't have to be, it can be in the way that you feels right for you, right? Like I love writing and something I've always enjoyed, just post personally, and I'm also good at it. So for me, that was like blogging and writing about it. But I think like, that can be anything, right? That could be a podcast, that could be video, that could be photography, it could be
mm,
anything of
mm.
just like kind of capturing the emotions, the what you're feeling, going through that, because I think that those are actually pretty, some of those stories and moments and actually factor still into my work and my talks today, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of because I documented it and was really, I don't know, I think that a lot of times these can be like really big parts of like how we get our business off the ground, these experiences, these journeys.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's sometimes challenging to do when you're kind of sitting in the questions to find the energy to be creative. And it sounds, I don't
yeah.
know, like I think it spotlights your resourcefulness and thinking about like, and your value of sharing and wanting to kind of connect with other people and share out what was happening. So so you moved to San Francisco, didn't know what you were doing. What's the next like story plot point?
I started a WordPress blog just like about the career transition. It was like $18 for the year for a blog. And people were like, "Oh, this is pretty good. Like you're a good writer. Like you should keep writing." And I was like, "Okay." And a couple people were like, "You should self-publish a book." Sorry, they were like, "You should write a book." And I was like, "Cool, I'm gonna get a book deal." And I've quickly learned that actually wasn't going to happen. I met with an editor in San Francisco. I had a friend who was a friend of a friend, basically a executive assistant, she may have been an intern at Chronicle Books, which is a local independent book publisher in San Francisco. They do a lot of cookbooks. So I got a meeting with this woman who's an editor there. And she was like, "Oh, yeah, no, we're not going to give you a book deal." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Yeah, yeah, well, you don't have much experience and you've barely written anything and you don't have a following." And I was like, "Oh yeah, but like check out all my writing. I've got this great idea for a book about my quarter life crisis." And she was like, "No, no, no, you should self-publish. You're not ready."
Mm, mm,
And that's exactly what I did. So I decided to self-publish a book called The Quarter Life Breakthrough. I wanted to kind of like capture like this moment that I was going through and other people were going through, like flip it from something negative like a crisis into something positive like a breakthrough. And I self-published the book. I did an Indiegogo campaign to raise money so that I could do publish the book and hire an editor and pay for a cover. And the campaign raised $12,000 from over 500 people in I think 20 countries. This is in the early days of crowdfunding. So for those of you listening that don't know what Indiegogo or Kickstarter were, kind of like GoFundMe campaigns for creative projects. They're still around. I think it's less popular these days, but it was like a kind of a moment where those things were pretty popular for people that maybe were launching creative projects or books or even apps or physical products.
I mean,
So it,
500 people is like a number worth saying, right? Because even thinking about getting that many people to land on your page, your sales page for your book or even buy your book, that's a pretty good start. So,
I was blown away. I mean, I
yeah.
was like, who is this person in Kansas City that I've never met before that's pre-ordering the book? They're giving you money. The book didn't even exist yet. It was
Mm,
just an idea, right?
right.
And so it totally, I was kind of what it really is like, people call this in business like proof of concept, right? Or like an
Mhm.
MVP, or kind of like you're A/B testing an idea. But it was, to me, I was like, oh my gosh, there's something here. People want this.
Mm.
They're giving me money for the promise of maybe having this, which is pretty cool. Like usually when you buy a book, like, oh, you can see that the book is done. You might be able to flip through a few pages. This was like, I was just like, this is the book I'm going to write. Would
Right.
you support it?
Wow.
And people were saying yes. And the majority of the people who backed the campaign were people I had never met before. And so this is like my first foray into entrepreneurship, to business. Like that was my first kind of creative business project. And that's like, in my early 30s. And it was really an exciting time for me. I think, I won't tell you like what my annual income that year was, but it was very low, if anything. But I think I never had felt more excited just about like my
Mm.
life. And
Mm.
I think that was a big piece of it too, was like San Francisco to me, especially in that era, presented just a creative landscape. There were a lot of people that were doing innovative stuff, creative stuff, entrepreneurship, artistic. I had five roommates. My room was basically barely big enough. It just fit, like you walked in and fell onto the bed, and there was like a little side desk. I moved into the room like sight unseen because I had a friend that was living there and was like, "This is a great place to land." If it was right by the Panhandle in San Francisco near Golden Gate Park, and I don't
Mm.
know, there was just like a spirit of like you don't have to have like it all figured out. You don't have to have a quote unquote real job.
Mm.
Now, San Francisco's become, even then, but especially now, it's become way more not affordable. But it was slightly
Mm.
better back then. But at
And
any
can I
rate, the
ask,
creative spirit was really important to me. Like I just met a lot of people that were doing something that if I had heard about that 5 years ago, like in Boston or New York or DC, where I spent a lot of time before, I would have been like, that's not a real job. Like that doesn't exist. That's fake. But in San Francisco, like 9 out of 10 people I met were like saying something like that. But that was really important for me, of like having that community of like kind of dreamers, creatives, weird people.
yes.
That was a big piece of my story, was kind of having these other people doing kind of creative stuff.
Yeah, I want to accentuate that. And it reminds me of you talking about your experience at Starting Block because you had never looked around and seen kind of like everyday people who were running their own businesses. And I think just speaks to that power of being, with like-minded or similar valued people and how that can be such a boost to, not only just the everyday, like we can share ideas and we can talk about some of the same things, but even in terms of validation of like what's approved of and what is celebrated in a community or the bubbles that we live in. So I think it kind of links to this curiosity I have around you made this leap. You're kind of painting this picture of the East Coast, Boston, New York sensibilities. Maybe even you didn't say this, but I wonder how were your family and friends that you were embedded in that community on the East Coast, how were they viewing your move? Did they feel supportive? Were they scared for you, skeptical? What responses were you getting?
I think, yeah, I mean, I have very close relationships and people were supportive, but and like friends and family were supportive, but I think the bigger piece of it is like the strangers piece, right? So like those types of people like were less like not necessarily strangers, but like kind of acquaintances or people like that you would meet at like a bar. You're like,
Hmm.
what? Like that's not a real job. You know, that kind of or that was maybe just my interpretation. It's possible that like that was in my head, but that there was just kind of this like, especially in DC, where it was like if you didn't work for a specific, agency or senator or had this level next to your name or were like going to help somebody like jump 3 steps in their career, like you were useless. That was my perception. Now that's totally not true. There's amazing people there, obviously, but that there was this vibe, like a vibe thing of if you weren't on a specific career track, like you didn't have value.
Hmm.
And in New York, the vibe for me was like if you didn't have like insane money and connections, you were not of value.
Hmm.
um and in Boston, just like a little bit more of, yeah, kind of career ladder or like connected to Harvard or MIT or like a doctor, a lawyer, a whatever, just like that was my vibe. And I grew
Hmm.
up in Boston, so I had spent 20 years there. Whereas in San Francisco, for me, the vibe was, um you can do whatever you want. And again, that's a lot of that is internal, and but that's just how I perceived it at that time in my life, was that there was a lot more possibility, potential, less rules. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
And you seem so, it seems again so obvious that you would be writing the book, The Quarter Life Breakthrough. What response did you get to that book? I know we're hearing about the Indiegogo backers, but how do you think that book kind of, I don't know, changed the trajectory of what you do, if at all?
Oh, I think it was huge. I mean, the book. So I did the Indiegogo. The book ended up selling 10,000 copies on Amazon.
Whoa, I
And
didn't know
for,
that.
which for a
Amazing.
self-published book, for actually for any book, is quite good. Um, Most books sell basically 100 copies or less.
Wow.
um, Published books sell more than that, but even published books often sell about 1,000 copies. So um, it was it was um, it was definitely a success, and it also kind of told me that there was something there. Like I was hitting on a moment, like a cultural moment, and now I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of like peak millennial, so to speak. Or I could kind of interpret it more from a trends perspective. At the time, I was kind of like, which I think the best businesses are just started from like a deep, this is what's happening for me, or this is a problem like I want to solve for myself, my family, my child, my friend, my community. Um, and the best products and businesses come out of that. And that's really what that was for me, was like, this is what I'm going through. This is what some of my friends are going through, like this quest for meaning, this quest for purpose, like not just wanting the job that looks good, not just wanting a salary, or going to retire at 65 with savings and a picket fence. And, like that's just
Yes.
not real or available, or I want something else, or I want meaning and purpose and satisfaction now. And I want something else for my life. Um, that I kind
Yes.
of that was a real, that was kind of, if you look, that was, this is 2012, 2013. If you think about it, it's very early social media days, before some of the platforms that we know now to be quite dark and evil, were still thought of then as having a lot more potential. And there was a lot more kind of optimism in the air. And this is, so I think I captured that spirit a little bit at the right
Hmm.
time. Now I look back and kind of can analyze it then. What I was really just doing was talking about my own experience and the experience of other people and entrepreneurs and creatives that I knew that were
Right.
in their mid late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s. But it was like that was when the millennials were the largest generation at the workforce, and were kind of shaping, frankly, a lot of tech and business.
Yes, you captured that
So
kind of
I kind of
cultural
captured
moment.
that like cultural moment of like meaning and purpose being talked about at work in a way that they probably hadn't been on a wide scale basis prior. So I think that
Yeah.
that's why the book kind of took off. And interestingly enough, after the book had some momentum, I went back to that same editor at Chronicle and I was like, look, I did it. I did what you told me to do. I self-published the book. It sold 10,000 copies. Here it is. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, like this is amazing. Like you did it. Whoa, like I didn't think you were going to do it. Like this is actually really good." And I was like, "All right, so let's do it. Let's do the book. Like can I get the book deal?" And she's like, "No, we're still not giving you a book deal." And I was like, "Oh man. Come
Wow.
on. Like I did what you told me to do. I did it. I not only did I do it, I did it like really well. Like I spent a ton of time on it. I did the crowdfunding, like I had an editor, like the content is really good, it's selling well.
Right.
And
Why
she
did she
was
say
just
no?
like, well, we just published a book about
Uh-huh.
career change from these folks that have an MTV show and have a big following and are more famous than
Mm.
you. So sorry. And I was so deflated. But she was like, you know what, though? This is really impressive and really solid. I'm going to introduce you to a literary agent that's a friend of mine. Maybe you all can work together and put something together. So she introduced me to this woman, Lindsay, um, who I chatted with, and then we sold a version of Quarter Life Breakthrough to Penguin Random House. So I did get the book deal, just not with this publisher.
I see.
And it ended up working out for me. So it was one of these kind of like, as you say, it takes time and the journey kind of has many different stages and you just don't know what's going to happen once you kind of set out to do these things.
Yes, I love that you went back and yeah, it wasn't the kind of obvious first satisfaction of like, okay, now the Chronicle Books is gonna give me the book deal, but it worked out with Penguin, which is awesome. I want to ask a bit about what happened in between the Indiegogo to the book deal in terms of selling, 10,000 copies. My sense is that didn't happen with you just putting up, the sales page and then letting people find it, right? You probably had to be pretty, proactive and talking about it or sharing about it. What did that, I guess, like the marketing of the book look like in that day and age?
Yeah, it was a different time. I would say that it was a slightly more simple time just because I think of now and how and marketing and frankly like what's so challenging for me as a creative now with marketing is that there's just so many things you can do or could do and so many platforms. And at the time, it was really just Facebook.
Mm.
In terms of the social media world, newsletters were the biggest thing. Actually, frankly, still are one of the biggest things for book marketing. Book marketing
Mhm.
podcasts would probably be the biggest. Actually, now the biggest new channel. But
Mm.
similar to newsletters, podcasts have this reputation for a host likely has cultivated a deep relationship with their audience, right? If people listen to your podcast, even if it's just a small amount of people, they're spending what, 45, 60, 75, 90 minutes with you every week. Like that's a lot of time, right?
Yes.
So they trust you. So if you're to bring on a guest and for them to talk about their book, you're probably going to buy the book. Similar to a newsletter, if you subscribe to a newsletter, or now would be called, now would be a Substack, or at the time I was using Mailchimp.
Hmm.
You're likely to be like, oh, I read this newsletter every week or every 2 weeks or every month. Like, I want to see what's inside. It's a little bit of a deeper relationship than someone you follow on Twitter, right?
Right.
There was like all this back in the day, like a lot of stats of basically nobody buys books, um, on Twitter, on Instagram, as much as
Mm.
they're buying books when they see it in a newsletter of someone that they trust.
So is it
Um,
safe to say that you kind of, even though the sort of landscape of different marketing channels was simpler at the time, you showed up on the ones where, um, by virtue of being there, you were kind of receiving the trust that whoever was hosting that podcast, it kind of rubbed off on you so the people listening could say, well, yeah, if Melissa trusts, Smiley to be on her podcast, then he's a quality person and I'm going to go check out his book.
Yeah, and I think like the thing, and I think I wrote a blog post about this, which I could try to dig up if it's still on my new website or if it got lost in the shuffle. But it was called "This is a Community, Not a Book," and that was my whole strategy with marketing was micro marketing. I
Mm.
think that people with books, especially, but even with other products, are like, this thing is going to change everyone's lives, right? Or this thing's going to be on the Today Show, or like, how can I get in the New York Times? Like they go to like the biggest possible potential platforms. Whereas really, I think why this book was successful was because I was super targeted to like a 28-year-old millennial that is about to quit their job or just quit their job,
Mhm.
right? Or is unhappy at work or is rethinking their life. And so then it's like, okay, I'm going to go to Starting Block. I'm going to go to the communities I already have. I'm going to go to like the Muse and like these career blogs that were big at the time, Refinery 29, and like, some of these kind of early blogs and websites that, and Fast Company and, this like things that were actually like the type of readers and audience that would be really interested in this. I think that that was like a big strategy of mine.
Yes.
And one of the things that I did that actually turned out to end up really evolving my life and business was I did a TEDx talk. So this is in 2015. So I had self-published the book, but the published version with Penguin hadn't come out yet. And I did a TEDx talk at TEDx Mile High, which is the TEDx event in Denver, TEDx Youth at Mile High. So it was in the Denver Opera House, which is like
Mm.
this beautiful, like amazing place. To date, probably the biggest, if not one of the biggest venues I've ever spoken at. And this is one of my first like big talks. And
Wow.
it was kids. So they had, I think it was 2,000 people. So it was all youth. And that basically I think like all the Denver public schools like brought their kids to the event. Like this was kind of like, okay, like take your class to TEDx Day, basically. So it was all like kids ages maybe like 8 to 14 or something, like piling into this opera
Wow.
house. And, this was like the first time I'd ever given like a real talk. Like I had done like a pitch or like, here's maybe, a little bit about my book, or maybe I did like a career workshop, like a career kind of like basic workshop based on the book a little bit. But I had never done like a talk, certainly not a TED talk.
Do
And
you
so
feel
I
like
was
giving it to youth felt
super
like,
nervous.
did it make it more nerve-wracking or less
Way more
knowing?
nervous to it's
Mm.
I speak to corporate audiences almost every single week, people all ages, that are very high power, high profile people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And I always think that the hardest audiences are kids. um, I would say college, high school, and then even younger would be the hardest because they have like no tolerance for bullshit. And they're just
Yes.
like, and they can, if you're not authentic, if you're not real, if you're trying too hard, like they just sense it and they're like, no. They're so hard to connect with.
So how did that one
But
go?
but they love you if they love you, they love you. So it's one
Mm.
of those things. But it went so well. I was so nervous going into it. I remember like I was in the bathroom when they called my name. Um, like it was like I was the last talk of the day, which is the worst. Like it was like 4:45 p.m. or something, and people have been sitting in the auditorium all day long and tired. And I was like, oh my God, they calling my name. So I like run out of the bathroom and like get on stage. And it went so well. And that talk now has over 2 million views
Wow.
on YouTube. So, and this is 2015. So this was TEDx was a little bit more illustrious then, or there was less events, I should say. So I think that allowed the talk to kind of get some traction. They titled it "Refusing to Settle: The Quarter Life Crisis," which wouldn't have been my first choice of title. I don't think it's what I picked, but it turned out to be a good title, I think.
Mhm.
Um, because I think a lot of people search when they're having a quarter life crisis. That's what they search in Google.
Yes.
So the point I was trying to make was the marketing. that ended up being one of the biggest marketing wins, was the talk
Mm,
to then drive the book.
gotcha. And
So yeah.
and you had this big success. How long after that TEDx talk did it really dawn on you like, oh, I could, make a business out of the speaking side of things? Like, was there any part of you right away that was like, that was pretty cool. I want to do more of that. Maybe I can get paid to do it. Or did that come later?
I think that like early, like right away, I was like, ooh, there's something here. I wouldn't say like
Mhm.
this is going to be my profession, but I early on was kind of like, ooh, like there is an energy here. I'm really, really enjoy this. I'm good at
Mhm.
it. I'm getting even way better feedback than I'm getting from the writing, from the book stuff. Like there's just
Mm.
initial, like an immediate feedback hit. People are really responding to it. People come up to me afterwards, but the
Mhm.
biggest thing for me was realizing, oh, there's a financial piece here, because the thing that I struggled with the writing was that I quickly learned that the economics of publishing, to put it bluntly, are shit and are really not advantageous to authors, especially authors that don't have mega, mega, mega successful platforms or huge platforms. And I think, to
Mhm.
be frank, it's only gotten worse. Um,
Mhm.
so I was just kind of like pretty blown away that this thing that I had gone for so long, or even heard about, right? Book deals and working with Penguin. It was kind of like, oh, this is like, oh, I don't, well, this is like not that awesome. Like I'm grateful that I had that opportunity, right? And I'm grateful that I got to have a book that was in bookstores and what have you. But I slowly started to realize that the economics of it were not great. Like a publisher takes more than 90% of the royalties of a book. Like that made no sense to me. It makes no sense to me now. Like in this day and age, like that's just
Yes.
not cool. Like what artist or creative would put out their work and have somebody take 90% of it? Like
Right.
that makes no sense, especially when you now have tools and platforms and technology that allows you to reach, people directly. It maybe made sense in 1973 or 1994, but it definitely doesn't make sense now.
Right.
So that to me was just like, okay, this isn't working. And the flip side of that, like also on the kind of audience thing, and this is a big piece for anyone starting a business, is like you got to figure out the audience. So there was an audience interest in the millennial kind of group, but all I was selling was a $15 book. And so maybe like the product or the business add-on there is like career coaching or workshops, but I really struggled with like the fact that like that population didn't have much money. Or and was kind of like, no, we got it from the book. Like we're good. Like I know what you talk about.
Yes.
You gave it to me for $15, and they're like, I'm not going to give you $100 or $200. And I was like, oh man, like I just like kind of quickly realized I was like, this is a really hard, like this is not kind of going to work. But then, like the first couple of times I started to do something at a company or for people that were in the corporate world, I realized that the questions they were asking were way different. That what was resonating was not the "you should quit your job," which is like a message that is never going to fly at many companies, but was like, "Oh, tell us about these people. Like, what are they looking for in their job? Like, what do they need from a manager? What do they need from a culture, from a
Mm,
leader? How can we attract them? How can we retain them? How can we get them to not quit their job?" And that
right.
was the unlock. Which I always tell people that are speakers, but this could pertain to any creative. Like, what are the questions that you get in Q&A? Like, what are the questions that people ask you in a coaching session? What are the
Mhm.
questions that people ask you about your podcast or about your product? Right? That gives you a clue of like what people are really into. And those were the questions I was getting at the end of talks or when I would meet people. And I was like, oh, this is where there is something. And then when
Right.
somebody like offered me, $5,000 to come in and speak for, 45 minutes, I was like, wait, what? Like, that's more money than I made on doing this stuff for months. Like, you going to pay me $5,000 for 30 minutes? And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a thing. People get paid to do this. And that totally was like a unlock. And I basically haven't looked back since.
Mm. It's, I want to move forward with hearing about your speaking business and, knowing that you have written several books since that first one, knowing that the economics of it don't really make, there's not a great ROI. What made you write more books, knowing that?
Yeah, I would say that there's not an ROI, it's more like an ROC, like a return on community or a return on credibility.
Mm,
So, and a return, an ROP, a return on purpose, or return on ROM, return on meaning. So,
mm,
after that project, I was like, like this is not the business per se, like the capital B business. This is not about put in time, energy to receive money. This is put in time, energy to make an impact on people's lives and to further the other parts of my business. Like this is a calling card. This is something to get attention. This is something to build energy toward another thing that I'm doing.
mm. So
That
you
I did
almost like,
not learn till after the first project. Frankly, I did two versions. So I basically rewrote Quarter Life Breakthrough, 50% new book. So I wrote the same book twice, which was a powerful experience in many ways. But it taught me, oh, this is like a conduit, a pathway to other work, to other business opportunities. And now when I write a book, I'm thinking strategically, like I'm playing chess, not checkers. Like this
mhm.
isn't about, oh, let me write book, sell book, make money. This is write book to engage a specific audience to further a different goal that actually has nothing to do with the pages of the book. Um,
Yes, that makes a lot
so
of sense.
that's how I kind of now think of it. So I will always think of myself as an author, and I probably will. I hope to write many more books in my career, but I don't expect them. I know I have much more level set expectations of what that's going to do and not do. Like,
Yes.
so I think people should write a book, for very like so many people come to me of like, I want to get a book deal. And I'm just like, all I ask is why. Or I want to write a book and I keep saying why. And what I really want them to understand is like to get to the purpose of it for them and their either for their own kind of personal healing journey or their personal story, like that's great, but really for like their own life, like how does it fit into their business, like their strategy? Because I think all too often, and this was something that happened to me, it's like I'm fitting into every other author's strategy or every blog about a book ever written or what Tim Ferriss does or every, blah 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 blah. Like who cares? Like what is this book going to do for you, your business, this your life at this moment in time? That is
Right.
what matters, and that can be big, small, weird, like it can be its own universe of things, and that is what it's all about.
Mm. Yes, powerful that like, you had to learn this by doing it and kind of venturing into it and understanding um, what role writing and book publishing was going to play in your business. And it sounds like instead of it sort of being the epicenter and the kind of like central product, it almost became more of like a channel, like a medium out towards other people, a connection point. I like that
Yeah, and
strategic sort
a
of.
springboard. Like if
Mhm,
I look back
mhm.
now, 10 years, 10 plus years later, I can say that the book launched my speaking business. The book made me even realize speaking was possible. I didn't even know that that was a thing. I didn't even think that that was something I didn't even know that that was a skill set of mine, let alone a business opportunity. So,
Mhm. Well, I loved hearing about how when you reflected on your TEDx talk in Denver, you registered how good it felt. You felt like you were doing something that energized you. You got immediate feedback. You enjoyed doing it. You felt like, like that embodied experience kind of gave you quick feedback that this is something you could do more of. And so it's like my hunch is that you've been doing a great job at kind of tuning into like what feels good in practice and letting that kind of help guide you. Of course, being strategic and thinking about, the dollars and cents and all of that, but um, not ignoring that internal feedback along the way. I want to create time for us to kind of segue into our little, you know, top hits of insights and lessons learned. But I think right before I do that, I want to speed to today. And it strikes me that you're so good at capturing that cultural zeitgeist, and you were listening to what the corporate clients were sort of asking. And now, could you share a little bit about the product or the service that you offer that people are hiring you to do?
Yeah. Um, so my main business is keynote speaking. I get paid to do, for the most part, 55 to 60-minute talks about culture, belonging, connection, and the future of work. So what that means is companies, conferences, trade associations bring me in to kind of help people think about what talent and what their employees are looking for at work and how to connect them better in this kind of hybrid AI, disconnected digital world that we live in, right? Where loneliness is on the rise and mental health challenges, and we have six generations working together at work, kind of how to navigate all of these challenges at work. I kind of come in and give them a talk that's inspirational, makes people laugh a little bit, but really is kind of tactical, practical, actionable, gives people a lot of tools that don't require necessarily like a HR strategy or a new budget, but how do I talk with my team? How do I build connection with my team? How do I be a better leader? How do I kind of build a better culture at work? And my main business is keynotes. Like the main product is just this keynote talk. And of course, I change it for every client or audience based on the folks and what they do. And I do a lot of deep interviews to make sure it's customized and resonates. But there are parts of the talk that are the same for everyone. It takes a long time to get to a point where, you can get paid to give the same talk over and over again. Um, but it's exciting for me, and it doesn't get old. I switch things up, and every time something's happening in the news or the world, like you have to evolve it. And obviously, with the pandemic, that shifted everything. And now I am a keynote speaker. I do about 50 talks a year, maybe a small portion of them virtual, but most now in person, which I prefer, especially since I'm speaking about human connection and belonging. I
Mhm.
love going to events. Like I get such a rush from going into the room. Sometimes it's 100, 200 people. Sometimes it's, 1,000, 2,000 people. Um, I think if I wasn't a speaker, I'd be like an event planner or something because I just love events and the rush and like people going into the room and going into the breakouts and like the coffee and the snacks and the party. I just love all of it.
Yes.
I'm an extroverted person. I like my me time for sure, but I love just being around people and that like kind of that space. So I feel super grateful that I found something that I think hits the hits all those things that you want, right? Something that you really just intrinsically enjoy, that I'm good at, and that it actually financially is a very viable
Yes, that sweet spot.
sweet
And
spot. Yeah. And
I
there's
would,
also things about it that are hard. Like I also like want to make like I know you and I could talk forever, but um it's not like it's all roses and rainbows. Like there are parts of the job that are sales, there are parts of the job that are administrative and contracts and invoicing, and lots of Zoom calls and clients that want to switch things at the last minute. And there's parts of it that and the travel can be. It was fun early on and sometimes still is, but frankly now, like as you get older and with a partner, or if you have a family, like it's exhausting. It can be lonely.
Mhm.
Um, so there are parts of it that are really hard, but overall, I love my work and I feel very, very, very grateful that I get to do what I do and that I'm very proud uh, of what I've built.
Yes, you've earned that. that satisfying fit. And I really
Yes.
appreciate you not shying away from talking about some of the challenges because, yeah, I think it's really helpful to remind people that you can, dream up the most highly tailored business to yourself, and it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be trade-offs. There are always going to be hard things, but it's hopefully that set of hard things you can live with, or the bright spots kind of outweigh some of those tougher moments. One part I wanted to return to is this idea of, a lot of your talk might be customized around the edges, but you do deliver part of the talk that is the same every time, and that kind of goes back to this idea of consistency. And it's something I've been thinking a lot recently as someone who's historically changed up things a lot, and I'm always kind of, I almost identify as an experimenter and a tinkerer. And for me personally, right now, I'm feeling like my evolution can be in shifting my relationship to repetition. And I think even just, yeah, strategically, you hear that a lot with brand building. It's like you need to just stay consistent and repeat, 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 repeat what you're doing because, people's attentions are fleeting, or it takes a certain amount of reps for someone to really let you land in their consciousness. So, what has it required for you, or what might you even like piece of advice would you give someone who's having a trouble with maintaining a core offering or staying consistent?
Yeah, this is going to be one of my this is like my master class of my
Great. Let's
lessons,
go
but
there.
let's go there. Yeah. I mean, I think that the biggest thing that I when people are like that people that knew me in, let's say, 2012, 2013, they like, I bump into them, or I message me on LinkedIn or something. They're like, I can't believe that you're still at this. Like they're like, I've done like six things since then. Um, but what I want to say is two things. To some extent, that's true, and it looks maybe more like it's one note than it actually is. But I do like what the phrase I like to use is stay in your lane, but keep the windows open.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the kind of keynote speaker training and mantras that have been kind of instilled in me. And I do this program, which I recommend for everyone that wants to be a professional keynote speaker or do business speaking, called Impact 11. They always talk about stay in your lane, which basically means you are not a leadership, tech, AI, um, marketing, social media, and design thinking speaker. if,
Yes,
if that if you say that, like, you are literally nothing. You speak about absolutely nothing. You very well might be able to say things about all of those topics, but that is never going to work because you speak about everything, you speak about nothing. So the power of being like picking a lane and owning the lane and just hammering it over and over again. And this can get boring. It can get repetitive. You're like, oh my gosh, another thing about millennials, like another thing about career coaching, like that can be so draining. But if you kind of just hit that and go and you stay in it and stay in the lane, like people, you build that trust and also you build the expertise. But the key piece of it that I think is missed sometimes is to keep the windows open. Because by keeping the windows open, you're doing that for yourself of like what is speaking to you in this moment. And you're also doing that for like what is happening in the world of like, how is this shifting? How is this changing? So, for example, for me, I was deep in the millennial world, right? Millennials in the workplace, starting to be okay, Gen Z in the workplace, multi-generational workforce. Like I wrote so many articles, blog posts, interviews where like millennial workplace expert, Smiley Poswolsky, millennial workplace expert. All of that leads to like, oh, Google's ranking your website a little bit higher. Like, oh, people are starting to find you without you doing any sales. Like, oh, you're getting inbound speaking requests. All of these things. Um, but to keep the windows open, that means like, I'm starting to get a little bit tired of this. Like, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about friendship. I'm thinking about loneliness. I'm thinking about the importance of, community and connection, and like the world's becoming way more online. And I'm going to write a book about friendship. Like this is before the pandemic. And then, oh my gosh, the pandemic, loneliness is like this huge thing. Like, starting to talk about belonging and human connection. So like I'm still in my lane, right?
Yes.
But I've kept the windows open so that I can shift a little bit. And that's when I kind of made this jump to kind of like, okay, I speak about generations in the workplace, but I'm much more focused now on belonging and connection and culture. Um,
Yes.
so
I
people
love that.
know me deeply and respect me, but like I've kept the windows open, so I've almost shifted a little bit, but I'm not like swerving from like the other side of the highway to somewhere else to taking an exit and going off at a different exit. Like there are a lot of people I know that are like one minute they're a cryptocurrency expert, then they're an AI expert, then they're a this expert, and it's just like, wait a second, this is really confusing to the market.
Mhm.
Um, Whereas if they kind of just said like, if they kind of just picked a specific kind of thing, I think that it would have been much more useful for their business.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
helpful like tagline or catchphrase to keep in mind, the staying in your lane and keeping the windows open. It's so cool hearing about your awareness of the the years of like, okay, that was in 2012, this was in 2015, and just an incorporation of what was happening in the technology space, that really did influence the way that someone who's self-employed can run their business. And so all to say, like, you've been doing this a while and you've picked up so many hard-earned, lessons of wisdom along the way. So I wanted to kind of task you with the big bold question of like, yeah, if you were to distill some of your most prized nuggets of wisdom, what would they be?
yeah, this is a great question. I think the a big for me, just like a guiding principle of my work and how I built this is the importance of community and finding believers. Um, Most of my business is a relationship business. I think every business is a relationship business, but especially speaking, so many of the people that booked me to speak saw me years ago, or they heard about me from somebody, or that I was recommended by a different speaker or a speaking agent. And I just think that, especially for people that are self-employed or solo entrepreneurs, companies of one, it can be so the kind of like picture or image is like somebody like grinding in a cafe by themselves or at a co-working spot or like in on a beach in Bali or something. But like the reality is that it's all about the relationships. And I can say that like looking back now on 10 plus years, especially as I've gotten more successful, that the work that you do to build those relationships, which can look like so many different things, but like those coffee meetings, those lunches, those Zoom calls, those podcasts, like that is part of work. That is the work. I think it's the most important work. And then the work you do on your own is like 10 is almost like that's maybe more creative, but it's that actually like if you don't have that relationship foundation, I think it's really really hard to have a successful business, especially today where there's so much competition, so much noise, so much overwhelm that the
Mhm.
businesses, especially services businesses, that thrive and succeed, do so because someone has built like deep, meaningful relationships over the years.
Mhm.
And that for me has just been the truth. Like I think that that's something that I'm very good at, that I care about, that I enjoy, and is like a kind of distinguishing factor between, let's say, some other speakers
Yes,
that maybe are really good on stage, have great content, have great marketing, have a good brand, but like actually haven't spent the time or the care or the intention to build just deeper personal relationships with professional and personal colleagues.
totally. I plus one everything that you just said, and you and I met living in a community house, so I think
Exactly.
we share that value of community, of connection. I am thinking about people who wouldn't necessarily put those values at the top of their list. They might be people who maybe identify as a little more introverted or like to keep to
Yep.
themselves, or relationship building isn't their strong suit so far. Do you have any like starting action items, or something that they like, a small step that someone could take to just begin to flex that muscle of building relationships in their business?
Um, I think, when what I mean by that doesn't necessarily mean like a huge network. Like I actually think that actually sometimes it's the opposite of like deep connections with one or two people or a few people, right? Or a circle. So maybe it looks like, and if that's too much, you could start smaller, but like building an accountability group of like just 2 to 3 people that are creatives or do something similar to you. And then you meet, once a month or once a week on Zoom, right?
Mhm.
Or better yet, in person. But like, or identifying a couple, for maybe even something before that is just like identifying a list of other people that you look up to. You don't even have to reach out to them at first. And you just kind of just like start to have the list and start to kind of track what they're doing and what's interesting about what they're doing and their social media, their marketing, or things that they're doing in their business. So you're almost like looking at them from afar. It's like a little bit more of a lo-fi, less interactive way of doing it. And then maybe to kind of slowly start to reach out to one or two or three or four people. But I don't think
Yes.
it has to be like this, like I don't mean adding as many LinkedIn connections as possible. I don't mean like being popular. I mean building a group text, as it were, or a couple people that you can text when you have a question, a challenge. Like, should I title this article this or this? Like, do you like this video or this video? Do you like this color or this color? Like those little things. And like, or do you think I should do this offering or this offering? Like people that you can turn to for those questions,
Yes.
I think
That's a
is
helpful
really critical.
distinction. I think in this time where a lot of us as business owners can feel like, okay, I got to build my follower count or my audience or have the most, people subscribed. The kind of quality over quantity reminder
Yes.
is really helpful. And yeah, anyone wants some go-to additional recipes for relationship building should check out Smiley's book that we haven't even talked about because there's just so much to talk about that you've created. But Friendship in the Age of Loneliness has a set of really powerful, easy to digest and apply relationship building, strategies or tactics, however you might call them, or recipes. Um, all right. What else you got? I think we're on to Pearl
This
of
is three.
Wisdom number 3. Yes.
Okay, so three is actually very, very similar to the last bit of what you were just saying, but I think that there's so basically it would be like create exceptional content and focus on the quality over the quantity. I think that there is so much crap right now, and to keep up is absolutely impossible. And the better approach, or the approach that has worked for me, or that I identify with, is how can I make one or two or three things every year that I'm super proud of? And then if I post here or there and, all that, fine, great. But like to keep up with the day to day is absolutely futile. And as a creative, overwhelming, and I think leads to just like a bunch of mediocre content.
Mhm.
Rather, I would like to spend a lot of time creating something exceptional every year. So whether that's a podcast, a book, last year for me, it was this Workplace Belonging Toolkit, which is kind of like halfway in between a PDF and a book, like a 70-page guide, a really amazing video or a really cool tool, or an experience, or like an event or a conference, like, or a meetup group that you do, like creating those a couple things a year that are really deep and awesome and amazing, versus trying to win the day-to-day attention wars, which frankly, like unless you have a massive following and or a big team staff, like just seems frankly impossible,
Mhm.
for me. And again, that might be different for somebody else, but I found that like if I can channel to the best that I can, and sometimes I get caught up in trying to be like, okay, I got to come up with something like every day, every week. But like, what is my thing for this year, for this quarter, for this month that I'm mainly focused on in terms of content, or experience or project? That's really helpful and kind of keeps me a little bit focused through all of the noise, because otherwise it's just so easy to get bogged down and distracted and
Yes.
overwhelmed. And
I
And
feel
I'm
like
not saying I succeed at this. Like, believe me, like many days, many weeks, I'm just like, oh my God, like I got to do something. I got to respond to this, or I got to create something about this new thing that came out in the news, or blah, 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 blah. And it's just so overwhelming. And I think that's like actually the biggest struggle for a creative, or for me right now, is to maintain focus and kind of know what that priority is within all the noise.
Mhm.
Like, that is like a kind of, that's like the work.
Yes, I feel like relief in hearing you talk about this point of like, okay, wait, like I can just, focus on a couple quality pieces a year or a quarter. Like that feels just, I feel the relief in my body and thinking about that pressure coming off to just kind of keep up. And, my hunch is that to cut through the noise and to maintain focus has something to do with like the word mindfulness is coming up for lack of a better word, but it's like I have to be aware of how I am responding to the stimuli, the content that's out there that's kind of causing me to get into these little spirals of pressure. And I need to kind of take that breath, take that step back and say, like, okay, let me focus on, what I'm my lane, essentially, what I'm doing. And it does take an awareness of self to step back from and quiet that noise.
Oh, it's so
Um,
hard.
yeah.
It's so hard. Um, and then my last one,
Hmm.
it's almost like a two prong. I have five, we'll put it into four. But one is just the reiteration of what you mentioned earlier, which was this stuff takes time. I have put in my 10,000 hours, right? I have done 10 plus years of the work, and I do not think that I would be where I am today if without that. So whenever I see someone kind of jumping into the speaker circuit or trying to write a book or trying to kind of do the thought leadership thing or the keynote speaking thing and struggling a little bit, I'm just like, yep, takes time, keep going. So a reminder of that, but on with that, I think that the thing that I've really tried to gain a better understanding of that I'm is ongoing and will be, and I'm figuring it out as I go, is like the sense of what is enough. Because what they don't tell you is like that the mountaintop keeps moving. And you get to a point where you're starting to make a little money and then a little more money. And then you're like, oh, well, that speaker's made even more money, or they're even way more successful, or they did this, or they did this. And you're like, oh. And I think I really, especially in the last year or two, been like, okay, I need to have a sense of like, what am I like just good with? Like, oh, I've worked really hard to get to this point, but like, I'm not saying I'm gonna like stop having goals or stop trying to improve, but like if this is also pretty great, like this is enough. Like this is enough in terms of like whether that's money, whether that's like quote unquote success, or like what does that look like? Like whether it's for me like number of engagements or impact of number of people reached in the audience or types of clients, or like if I was not able to speak again, like I'd be very proud of like what I've done, right? And very like happy with where I am. And that's a really good feeling. And I have to come back to that because otherwise I get caught up in this kind of like never ending, like, holy shit, this person did double the revenue I did, or double the amount of engagements, or whatever it is, right? Or had double the number of accolades or great testimonials, or like,
Mhm.
people like them even more. Like it's just like you're just on this hamster wheel. And
Mm,
that to me feels like the biggest thing that I've learned and that I will continue to learn and continue to struggle with, frankly,
mm,
of like knowing what is enough as you build it and as you gain a little bit more success, momentum, whatever you want to call it, to have that sense. Because sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of doing it. Like this is it. Like you did, like you're doing it. Like now it's just about like sustaining and whoa, like cool. Like how does that feel? But that creates different challenges, right? You're like you got up to a place that you never thought you would get to, but now you got to keep it going, like oh my gosh, right?
yes. Yeah.
Without kind of feeling like you want to feel confident and proud, but you're also kind of like, I don't want to be like a beginner again. I don't want to be like feel like you want to feel like I've accomplished, but you also don't want to feel too accomplished. It's like this whole thing of like you can't get too chill because then you're like,
Right,
oh my
right.
gosh, I'm gonna lose it all. But it's just like this thing that like I trips people up, and I see a lot of people who have achieved a level of success and then go so harder into more and more success that they really get either burned out or burn relationships with people in their life that they love, or don't see their partners or families or kids or friends. And it's like
Yes.
kind of like you have it, you already had the thing. Like
Right.
what more do you need? um
No, I think that's such an
so
helpful question
yeah.
is what is enough? And it's like the Smiley who, had such a small bedroom in the house with
Yeah.
the apartment with four other people would see your life today and probably be like, wow, like amazing. I have this, you did it, you made it. So having that awareness of like, yeah, we can kind of be on these striving hamster wheels, but also how do you strike that balance of like not becoming complacent so that I don't know, suddenly the wheel stops turning before you know it and you're static, but also so that you're not, losing integrity and spinning off into, I don't know, like losing the heart, I guess, of what you're doing. So these are beautiful, pearls of wisdom that you've shared. And what I really appreciate is the added humility to say like, yeah, these are things I've learned. And also I continue to have to remind myself, right? It's not like we
Yeah.
just learn it and then we've like, checked off the box and we're done. Like these are perpetual, um, like dynamics or like themes that are going to show up for us that we have to keep reminding ourselves about. So I think that people listening would probably feel a lot of resonance in what you've shared. Thank you so much for your time today. I want to end with like, where can people find you and yeah, tune into what you're doing.
Sure. My website, smileyposwolsky.com, and I have a Substack newsletter, which you can subscribe onto there called Friends with Smiley. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn and a little bit active on Instagram. But those are my kind of two social medias. Um, but yeah, and you can get in contact via my website. But thank you so much, Melissa. I'm so excited to get time with you.
So I think the lesson, or out of all the beautiful pearls of wisdom that Smiley downloaded for us today, that I want to return to is this idea of building relationships. And I think he even said the word micro marketing, which is like, how do you take the kind of the bigness that it can feel to put together a content strategy and a big marketing plan and really think about like, what if it was just as simple as building relationships? Which is not to say that that comes easy to everyone per se, but I think when we can kind of humanize and put the faces back to the people that we're trying to connect with, it can kind of unlock some momentum. It can help us figure out more what we want to say, hopefully show up a little bit more authentically in what and how we say it. And so in this conversation, Smiley gave some ideas about what you can do to get started, especially if you're someone who doesn't pride themselves on being like a community builder, super extroverted type, like starting an accountability group, something with some repetition. I think one tactic that I wanted to share with you all too, which might feel, it's controversial in some ways, is to almost create like a drumbeat of outreach for yourself. And that can be as simple as creating a calendar. Maybe it's once a week, you try to reach out to 5 different people. And you might even help yourself out by thinking about a few different main reasons or tactics that you might reach out with. So are you trying to just check in and see how someone's doing and rewarming that relationship? Are you trying to kind of update them about your life and maybe some offer that you're doing? Are you trying to be curious and learn something about them? Or maybe even spotlighting and celebrating some of the work that they have done? But kind of getting this habit built and building this muscle around reaching out to people, I think can surprise you by how quickly it can make you feel not only more connected to others, especially if you work from home and for yourself, but also just to see kind of what opportunities spring up from those conversations. And I think people shy away from the word network and networking these days, but I almost want to bring it back because I think in some ways community is kind of overplayed. And it's like returning to this idea of like you are in a network, a connected, constellation of sorts with other people. And what I found in my experience is that most people actually really are excited to hear from you. And even if it kind of leads to not a follow-up conversation, even if the conversation just ends there, that it reminds you of this fabric, the social fabric that you belong to. And so that's kind of that parting thought I want to give to you is, how can you build that muscle in a regular way so that it becomes a little bit more habit and a little less effortful? And I think you'll be surprised at how your sense of a greater belonging and connectivity grows while also opening yourself up to new actual possibilities in your work.